Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Redmen TV and your latest episode of Expert Insight. My name is Dan Club. I'm delighted to be joined by the co-host of the Spanish Segunda Show for this one, Liam Bambridge. Liam, my friend, how are you? Okay.
Yeah, very good, thank you.
Good man. Thanks so much for joining me. As many people may well have guessed in the intro there, the Spanish Segunda Show means we're here to speak about Malaga and a particular link recently to Liverpool's owners, FSG. Now, we've known for some time that FSG are looking at, it's been about 18 months since it sort of first emerged that they wanted multi-club ownership. Michael Edwards has since come back into the football club infrastructure with that in mind to be part of this multi-club setup. And last week it was reported that FSG are now planning to potentially acquire 51% of Malaga. There's also some interest from PSG, I think. There's a Qatari thing going on at the same time. So it's all a little bit up in the air, really. But to begin with, I wanted to ask you sort of the current state of play at Malaga and sort of how it's got to this, I guess.
Well, it's a very interesting one, to be honest, because you've got a situation where the current owner came in and basically oversaw that's Abdullah bin Nasser Al Thani. He came in and oversaw the glory years in Malaga around about 10 years ago, and they actually made great headway in the Champions League and were very close, of course, to knocking out Borussia Dortmund. I think Malaga fans are still really happy about how that ended up a clear offside goal that robbed them a chance of competing even further, going even further in that competition. But then it all turned sour, and Al Thani is essentially not in charge of the club anymore. He still owns a 51% stake in the club, but he is not allowed to do anything. There's an administrator, and there's talk that essentially misappropriation of funds, use of the club to further his own business interests. All very murky and complicated, but ultimately he is still the owner. He still owns a 51% share of the club, but he's not allowed. The official administrator is Jose Maria Munoz, and he essentially administers the club on a day-to-day basis with this very strange situation whereby the owner isn't allowed to really do anything, and he doesn't seem to want to relinquish that, which perhaps we'll get onto in due course.
Yeah, we absolutely will do. Yeah, and just in terms of where they're at on the pitch right now, you alluded to sort of the glory years and successes that were. It's not quite the same now. I think the company sat 15th in the Spanish second tier. So, yeah, is this a case of to sort of focus on the pitch action? Is this a case of a bit of a sleeping giant, and maybe one of the reasons Qatar and Liverpool are looking at them?
Absolutely so. I mean, he did actually drop down to Primera Federación last season, which perhaps dulled the interest somewhat because in theory, Primera Federación, the third tier Spanish football was actually semi-professional. I'm quite sure that Malaga didn't run on a semi-professional basis last season, but in theory that's the case, and you do lose a lot of money by being at that level. But they bounced straight back up again, and yeah, absolutely so. They've got a fantastic fan base, tremendous potential there. And I suppose we could look, for instance, at the City Group's acquisition of Girona, and that happened when Girona were in Segunda. It's a tremendous ground, a really good grounding possibility, I think, for players. I think there's certainly that sense you could send players over there and they would, do really well at that level, and it's a decent level, and then you can bring them back, obviously, and try to, to fit them in as has happened. I mean, Sevilla obviously played more in La Liga, but City have done it very successfully. And even before Sevilla, there were players who were being blooded in the Segunda, and so you've got that dual possibility there. You can send your promising talents over there, and also as a business interest, it's clearly a business that can make money. And I think perhaps at some point we'll need to talk about the new stadium as well, which is, I'm sure, a huge attraction to both groups, really.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I want to touch a bit more in a bit more detail about why it's such an attractive proposition and some of the interesting factors that make it exactly that. But you mentioned a moment ago about the current incumbent and maybe his reluctance to move on. Like, what are the moving parts in and around this?
It's a really, really strange situation because obviously there has been, as you know, I mean, he knows about it, everybody knows about it. It's not uncommon interest, is it, that these two separate parties have been interested in. There was some talk that I think FSG had been to watch a game or something a couple of months ago, and to which Jose Maria Munoz said, "Well, they're perfectly entitled to come watch a game. And what does that mean? It doesn't mean anything." Which I thought was quite amusing because I'm quite sure they're not there on holiday. But yeah, they would have looked at that, of course. And the big stumbling block here is Altani. He doesn't seem to want to sell, and he maintains that, justice for Malaga is his current hashtag. We've been silent for a while, and the truth will out. Well, nobody really believes that. Everybody feels he's guilty as guilty can be, but he appears to be an incredibly stubborn individual, despite the fact that fans want him out. I mean, to the extent that last year, when Malaga were playing in the Primera Federación playoffs, he offered free travel to Tarragona, which is a long, long way from Malaga, for all the fans that wanted to go, and they all came back instantly and went, "No way, we don't want anything to do with you. We're not interested." So the relationship between fans and owner is completely broken down. They have no trust in him, no interest in him continuing in charge, but he seems to be ignoring that. And there's this long-running court case, which, as I say, he was stripped of his powers, 4 or 5 years ago now, and yet it still hasn't been resolved. And I get the feeling he thinks that sooner or later it will be resolved in his favour, but nothing suggests that it will be. So the sensible thing for him to do, I think he spent 36 million euros buying it back in 2010, I think it was. The sensible thing for him to do would be to walk away. He can make a healthy profit, I'm quite sure of that. But he doesn't seem to be inclined to do that. And I wonder, this is one of the big intrigues in the whole story is, do the courts eventually have the power to take his majority share away from him, and then it suddenly becomes very interesting, doesn't it? But he doesn't seem to think that can happen. I'm not so sure. I'm not a legal expert, but
No, likewise, I was going to ask you that, really. Is there anything, has there been any talk about maybe the courts intervening and stepping in and maybe stripping of it entirely or naming a price whereby you'd have to accept? Has there been any talk of sort of a figure at all around Malaga and what it might cost to acquire these shares?
No, I've heard nothing at all. As I know, Blue Bay own 49%, and I know that FSG has certainly targeted the 51%. That's all they need, isn't it, essentially, to take over and to have full control of the club. I haven't seen any figures mentioned, to be honest, which is interesting. But you would think at an initial price of 36 million euros back in 2010, it's going to have gone up quite a lot since then. But then we come back to this issue of this stadium, which I find fascinating in the whole how it all fits together, because the new stadium, basically, Malaga's been chosen as one of the hosts for the 2030 World Cup. Now, the stadium that's about to be built, Malaga are about to move into an athletic stadium from the start of the season after next, which is not great at all for them. But of course, at the end of that 2-year process, they get a 45,000-seater stadium, crucially paid for by the local council. Now, would the local council be interested in getting some of that funded? I suspect they would. I suspect they wouldn't mind if FSG or the Qatari group came along and said, "You know what, you're paying for this whole ground at the moment. Why don't we give you a bit of money towards it?" Equally, if that wasn't part of the deal, how attractive is that to the two investment groups to essentially be given a brand new stadium, which isn't theirs, of course, but imagine the increased revenue. Then the stadium only holds about 30,000, doesn't have, it's certainly showing its age. I mean, Malaga fans love it, but ultimately not great core hospitality facilities. You could make an absolute killing on this stadium when it's ready for use, and potentially not have paid for it at all. So, and even if you did, and if you did have to pay something towards it, would that then suddenly make, in these whole machinations that are going on behind the scene, would that possibly make it a much more attractive proposition for the council to say to the judge, how about we get rid of this guy? Because in return for that, we don't know. Spanish politics is complex and sometimes not entirely above board in many ways, and we don't know what's going on behind the scenes. But yes, exactly what you suggested earlier on. Could there be a compulsory purchase order? I don't know. I say, but I can't believe. I mean, I would have thought that both of these groups would have done their due diligence. I suppose, obviously, the Qatari group fancy their chances because, essentially, Al Thani is Qatari, so you would think that he would favour them. But they would have done their due diligence, I would have thought this man's quite a difficult character. I suspect we're not going to get very far with him. So there's no smoke that fire, is there? Do you know what I mean?
No, absolutely not. No, and FSG have walked away from looked at Bordeaux recently, obviously in a similar position in terms of once successful, maybe not so much these days, but they walked away because of some of the legalities and the complications behind the scenes. But if they're still at the table for this deal, we would imagine there might be a deal to be done somewhere along the line. We've mentioned a few factors that make them quite an attractive proposition, as you just said there. The fact they're obviously Champions League quarterfinalists at one point, the new stadium, the 2030 World Cup. There's, huge fan base, a lot of love for the football club within the city and all that sort of stuff as well. But can they be, Liam, can they be an attractive proposition and a distressed asset at the same time? Is that a world that a football club can exist in?
Yeah, I think so. I just think that they I'm not seeing any get them cheap at the moment, but I think there's huge potential there, and we see it ourselves, don't we, in the Championship in the United Kingdom. Lots of foreign owners thinking, we'll buy into this at this level. It's going to cost us quite a lot, but you know what? If we get promoted, we could be seriously in the money here. So you've got that potential with Malaga. You've got a big fan base already. You have got the potential to. The only issue that might, I think, concern them, but this would be a good thing as well, is that in Spain we have this quite strict límite salarial, which is widely abused by the top clubs, as you know, Barcelona and Real Madrid. But at Segunda level, it isn't. So the other thing that they would have in their favour, any investors, would be that clubs know, or fans know, that they can't splash the cash. They can't spend loads of money because they're not allowed to. Teams that come down from the Liga get quite a lot of leeway in terms of parachute payments and kind of, they are allowed to exist beyond their means. But Segunda clubs, as Malaga are, do not have that, and we saw that with Volgares at Castellón, and I've seen it with other owners that the feeling is, oh, go and sign loads of new players, and they're just not allowed to do that. So again, it's very attractive in that sense because you can come in and not have to spend an awful lot and not be allowed to spend an awful lot. And to be honest, the fans can't be unhappy about that because it's not permitted. So, but on that basis, it is quite an even division because of that, and I think it works really well, and that gives Malaga a great chance of getting out of it. You know what I mean? You look at them, you said they were 15th, but they're, I don't know, 7 or 8 points of the playoffs. And they've got a team that's run on a shoestring right now. Imagine a 45,000 seater stadium that's selling out most weeks, corporate, etc. Then suddenly your limited salarial goes up because, of course, your income is much more significant, and then you can start to splash the cash a bit, and then you can, but it's only the cash that you're making, which is a huge incentive, isn't it, for a club that doesn't want to come in, an investment group doesn't want to come in and spend hundreds of millions. You're just spending what you already got on the table. So that I think, yeah, there's huge potential there for Malaga. There's no reason why they couldn't be a Liga club. And yeah, there's so many pluses to this from my point of view, from an investor's point of view, but there is this one big stumbling block.
Yeah, and it's quite a significant one as well. I could almost feel the screams from Liverpool fans as you were talking there, saying that is so far up FSG street. Only being able to spend within your means, that is them in a nutshell. I could literally hear it in my
I
head
know
as
you
you
say
were
that.
talking.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That is a very attractive proposition. And you look at the teams that they've looked at. I mean, from what we're led to believe, Levante, Getafe, Real Valladolid. These are all clubs that, for me, haven't got anything like the potential. Levante's got a massive bucket load of debt, for instance. Getafe, yeah, it's not a great stadium. And, none of these clubs have got a brand new stadium being built for them. Do you know what I mean? It is such an attractive proposition at the level at which you're coming in. And as I say, yeah, FSG are well known for generally spending what they're getting, aren't they?
Yeah, it's in their wheelhouse. You're right. You mentioned we've done a few shows around like why FSG want this and what are the advantages, what's the impact, etc. You mentioned a couple of them earlier. One of them, I think, will be maybe buying players from South America and landing them at Malaga for a couple of years before maybe moving on to Liverpool. There's loads of that. But I want to get your perspective on what the Malaga fans might think of this. Now, we spoke off air before we started chatting officially, and you said they'd welcome it because new ownership. That's clearly just to get rid of the guy in existence. But in terms of being part of a multi-club group, do you think that's something that appeals to them and they'd be quite okay with at this point?
I don't think hugely they would be, but ultimately, as you say, there's such a feeling of discontent at the current ownership, and their hands are tied, of course, because
Yeah.
they're run by an administrator. They really are unable to. I mean, they've come back up to Segunda this year, and you can tell from the squad it's a group of a mixture of quite young players who've done really well, talented young players who are really performing to their very best of their abilities, and some sort of journeyman pros. That's all they can afford. And certainly with the potential to increase revenue. As I say, and initially, the only thing I would say is, this couple of years when they're going to be in this temporary ground, the athletic stadium is not ideal. It's not the ideal time to be coming in. But if you can bide your time and be patient, and I think the thing you've got on your side here as well as an investor is that Malaga fans know that's going to be a difficult process. They know it's not going to be brilliant. They've got an athletics track around the ground and probably won't all be able to fit in. And it's kind of suck it up, and then we'll get a nice new stadium at the end of it. And so I don't think there'll be a huge amount of discontent towards that. I mean, and of course they have seen the Girona model, and because Girona have done so well out of it, I think even if you're very, very traditional, you're going to look at it and go, we're going to get some great Liverpool players here. Why would we be unhappy about that? Do you know what I mean? It's not something where I think any football fan is going to say. I mean, we saw the example with Troyes, obviously in France. It hasn't really worked, but I think with the best example that Malaga fans have, albeit not on their doorstep, it's the other side of the country, but it is an example of a very good model that's worked extremely well for Girona. I don't think any Malaga fan is going to think this can't happen for us. I don't think they're going to be that precious about how it works. I think they'll be quite happy. I mean, at my own club, Real Zaragoza, they brought in some American owners, and there was a lot of talk about we don't want to be a feeder club for Inter Miami and all this kind of stuff. But this is a little bit different, isn't it? This is Liverpool. I don't think anyone's going to mind being a feeder club for Liverpool if they get some decent players and it achieves the objective which they want, which is to get back to La Liga.
Yeah, and again, as you say, given what's currently going on in the football club now, it'd be hard to imagine there'd be much pushback against the change because, yeah, it's pretty broken. I think it's fair to say from what you've told us. Liam, thank you so much for your time. Let people know where they can find the show and all that stuff, buddy, to keep abreast of everything Spanish Segunda.
Yeah, we'll certainly mention this as it develops. If it develops, then it's we're at the Spanish Segunda Show, so you can find us on all podcast providers, basically Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc. And we've also got our Twitter page. But obviously, I know your focus is most of your listeners is all about Liverpool. But yeah, we love you. Came and check us out, and we do usually discuss Malaga, not all basic issues that arise in our division, and this is one of them, of course. So I'm sure it won't be going away for a while yet.
No, it doesn't look like it, mate. Once again, thanks so much for your time. Everybody else, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Take care. I'll see you soon.